5 years ago, we started Axios with the mission to get you smarter, faster on topics that matter. We get you smarter about national topics like tech, politics, and sports. We make you smarter about your community with Axios Local. And now we want to get you smarter, faster about your job with Axios Pro. Finding the right news and information for your work can be daunting. And most of the time, when you do find what you need, the information is just too long and too boring. You should be using your time to make decisions, not sorting through noise. Axios Pro is here to help you make smarter decisions faster. Our deeply sourced reporters will give you actionable intelligence that's delivered in a way that's quick and easy to read. No fluff, just the good stuff. With Axios Pro, we're going to focus on the industries that matter to you. Each industry will have its own dedicated team of resources and reporters who know these industries inside and out. Every weekday will bring you important information and analysis that you can't get anywhere else. And guess what? This is just the beginning. Start your free trial at AxiosPro.com.
Welcome to our virtual event on addressing access and affordability in higher education. I'm Erica Pandy, a business reporter at Axios, and I'm coming to you from Hoboken, New Jersey. I want to welcome our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and on Axios.com. You can join the conversation today on Twitter with @Axios and the hashtag AxiosEvents. Over the next 30 minutes, I'll be joined by my colleague, Russ Contreras. We'll both explore policy and nonprofit moves that are aiming to break the barriers to accessing higher education. Our first guest is the Secretary of Education. Secretary Miguel Cardona is joining us from Washington, D.C. Welcome to Axios.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So I want to start by laying out a few things, like sort of the state of where we are right now. We've got student debt at a staggering $1.75 trillion and calls to cancel it getting louder. And at the same time, reporters I speak to who cover finance and higher education say they're seeing this sea change in terms of how much we're focusing on affordability, the moves that the Department of Ed is making to help borrowers. So before we get into what exactly you're doing, I would love to start big picture and ask you why, for you and your Department of Ed, is tackling affordability and access to higher education such a big priority?
Yeah. Well, thank you for framing it that way. It really is a priority. We know education leads to happiness. It leads to, in many cases, higher income, and all Americans should have an opportunity to access higher education. And sadly, it's not like that. It's really haves and have-nots. And if we're serious about giving everyone an opportunity to access the American dream, then let's make it available for everyone. Now, it's not for everyone, but everyone should have an opportunity to, attend higher education institutions, continue their education, and we believe it's our responsibility to make sure that we do what we can to make it more accessible, more affordable, and a better value.
And then zooming in a little bit, I mean, we're talking on Teacher Appreciation Week. A recent report from the National Education Association found that nearly half of teachers are struggling with student debt as they're doing their jobs. How are you working to make education more affordable for these invaluable workers?
It is Teacher Appreciation Week, and I think we should make a Teacher Appreciation Year this year. It doesn't take a pandemic for us to appreciate what teachers are doing, but this past year, I was talking to a teacher yesterday, and she was telling me, this was a tough year. There was a lot of transitioning back into the classrooms, and kind of helping families and students kind of get back into a routine, we need to do everything we can to make sure that we're removing obstacles for them to continue with their education or buy homes. I've been a very strong advocate for better competitive salaries for educators, good working conditions. But one of the things that we're doing that I'm really, really proud of is we've really revamped and fixed the public service loan forgiveness program. It was broken. It really was broken. 98% of the applicants were denied. And this program from 2017 until today, until 2022, served 7,000 people in that the span of 4 or 5 years. We've served over 113,000 in 1 year. So from 7,000 in 5 years to 113,000 in 1 year, we are working really hard to provide loan forgiveness to public servants, which is what was passed in 2007. So it's taken a lot of work, but it's worth it to know that educators don't have to be buried in debt for the rest of their lives. It's a good feeling to know that teachers are taking advantage now of public service loan forgiveness.
Right, and what you just said, the way I see it, a lot of this infrastructure was already in place. It's just there are things that broke over the years that you're kind of going in and systematically fixing. Beyond
Yeah,
public servants, what are the other groups you're targeting? Yeah.
some of it was benign neglect, but some of it was just we don't, we know what the intention is. We're not doing what we need to do to get the job done right. So we felt like when we came in, there was a lot of fixing, there was a lot of cleaning up to do, and being honest with borrowers and being transparent with our practices. And as a result, we're seeing really good examples of teachers. I met one yesterday, came into the department, who shared close to $100,000 in debt was forgiven. She had to read it twice. She couldn't believe it. She almost needed to try to verify it different ways. Public service loan forgiveness is real for public servants. So I encourage everyone listening, studentaid.gov, find out if you're eligible. We want to make sure as many Americans as possible can take advantage of this.
Right. And what are some of the other programs you're working on right now related to student debt and affordability that you're most excited about?
Yeah. I've said in the past, loan forgiveness is one thing, but we're also fixing the problems that got us to where we are. We're making sure college affordability is a shared goal with our college leaders, with our partners in the education field. And we've also looked deeper into some of these debts that borrowers have. And we've canceled over 400,000 borrowers. We've canceled their loans if they were deemed total and permanently disabled. And what we found was there were over 400,000 people who had loans and they were totally disabled. They weren't able to go work toward those loans, and they were eligible for loan relief. We provided that within 6 months of us being here, within 6 months of President Biden taking office. We're proud of that. We've also gotten rid of, discharged the loans of over 250,000 borrowers who were taken advantage of by places like ITT or DeVry Institute or Marinello Beauty Academy. They were preying on Americans who were chasing the American dream, and they misled them. So we've discharged those loans. Those Americans no longer have those loans. We're proud of that. We're cleaning up messes. We're also fixing the system to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
And I want to turn now to kind of alternative forms of higher education. I know this is something you're passionate about. One stat that I keep coming back to when I talk about this issue, around 75% of the new jobs that were added to the US economy between 2008 and 2017 required college degrees or higher, but nearly 2/3 of our labor force is composed of workers without college degrees. And a lot of these jobs can be done without degrees. It's just become kind of this arbitrary barrier to entry. How are you working to, both expand access to alternative forms of higher education and remove this stigma that we've somehow accumulated around it?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me just connect this question to the last one. I think we're going to see improvement in college affordability because many of our students are looking at these other options as great options, and they are great options. You're talking right now to a automotive technician student throughout high school. I went to a technical high school, and I know the value of technical education. And I'm going to tell you, one of the things I'm most excited about as Secretary of Education is really evolving our high schools and our two-year schools and our workforce partnership to make sure there's a more clear through line to these pathways to careers that exist today, high paying jobs, high skilled jobs, where we know our employers are needing highly skilled employees that are going to come in and make great money with no debt um, or very little debt. So we're excited at the Department of Education to really push this. We know with the infrastructure plan and with the jobs of today and tomorrow, in many cases, you don't need a four-year degree. So with regard to that stigma, I'm an example of career technical education and having options. And I want to make sure more students across the country see it as a great option, a viable option to happiness, to a fulfilling career and a great life.
And you've got the high level view here. What do we need? Do we need better messaging from companies? Do we need more companies to kind of, put their resources and money behind this? Do we need high schools to get involved? What are the pieces that need to come together to really expand and make this field thrive?
Yeah, all of the above. What you're going to get is a Department of Education that understands the importance of it and is going to take lead. We're going to roll up our sleeves to make sure that our workforce partners understand what their role is, that our 2-year schools and 4-year schools understand what their role is, and that our high school leaders, our superintendents, that they know what their role is. And we're going to we're going to remove silos so that there could be a partnership there that exists in every state to make sure all children, not only in technical high schools, but in comprehensive high schools, have pathways and options for success when they graduate. Right now, we have too many silos. We have pockets of excellence across the country. There are some wonderful models, but it's not pervasive throughout our country. We're going to change that. We're going to make it so that every state has a great model and every student in our high schools has options when they graduate.
So we've got just under a minute left. We touched on the fact that it's Teacher Appreciation Week and how it's been a really tough 2 years for teachers with COVID, with classrooms becoming political battlegrounds. What's your message to America's teachers right now?
My message to teachers is I see you, I hear you, I appreciate you, and we're fighting to make sure that we continue to lift the profession. Competitive salaries, good working conditions, teacher voice at the table when we're talking about reimagining education. We're fighting for you, but we also recognize what you've done in the last 2 years, especially. And we appreciate you and we thank you for what you're doing for our students.
Thank you, Secretary Cardona, for taking the time.
All right, great to be with you. Take care.
And next, we have a View from the Top segment with my colleague, Mia Boykins.
Thanks, Erica Pandy, and thank you to our sponsor, Sallie Mae, for making this conversation possible. Now, joining us is Chief Executive Officer at Sallie Mae, John Witter. Welcome, John.
Mia, thank you. It's great to be with you.
From your expertise, tell us, what's missing in the current debate about college affordability and student debt?
Mia, thank you. There's been a lot of discussion lately about loan forgiveness, and I don't have much to add to that discussion. What's missing for me, however, though, I think is the broader question, which is how do we find ourselves in this situation? And maybe more importantly, what needs to change in the future so that we don't end up back here again? If I could give just a little bit of context, the federal government makes a little bit more than $100 billion of new student loans every year. And in fact, of the roughly $1.7 trillion of federal student loans outstanding, about half have been made in the last decade. And under those loans is really a tale of two cities. There's a group of students who are doing great. They got super undergrad or graduate degrees, they found gainful employment, and they are really fulfilling their financial obligations without undue stress. But there's also a group that's really struggling. And unfortunately, that group is disproportionately first-generation college students and those from historically marginalized or at-risk communities. And we simply need to figure out how to do better, or we run the risk that the next generation of at-risk students will have the same experience that the current one has had.
Thank you for such a practical response. Based on that response and your knowledge of America's relationship with student financing, what factors in the current financial and education system are driving the issues of affordability and student debt?
The federal student loan program, Mia, is extremely complicated, and I'm sure there's many factors. If I had to simplify it and boil it down to one factor, though, I would say that the current system really does too much for too many and not enough for those who are truly in need of support to both access and complete their degrees. And at the end of the day, student loans, whether they're federal loans or private loans, really do serve an important part of any family strategy for figuring out how to pay for college. But as we say to our customers all the time, they can only be part of that strategy. They need to be complemented with scholarships and grants and savings and family support, and the list goes on. And the federal system has really become, I think, overly dependent on student loans. And that's true for the population as a whole. It's especially true for that at-risk population who doesn't have access to those broader financial resources. And therefore, it's really, should not be a surprise that those who graduate with a lot more debt are the ones who disproportionately struggle after graduation.
I agree. You've raised several excellent points about the state of student financing, which mostly affects traditionally underserved students. With that in mind, what can be done to make sure the system is working for those students?
Mia, we have an ideal in this country that if you work hard, you can do, and you're smart, you can do better than your parents, you can achieve your American dream. And access to higher education is really a key enabler of turning that ideal into a reality. My father is an immigrant, came to the US, literally taught himself English reading the dictionary. And if you asked him, he would tell you that any success he's had is really driven by the fact that he had the ability to attend a high quality US college. And so I really am, an embodiment of the multi-generational impact that access to higher education can have. But unfortunately, so many of those historically marginalized or at-risk communities don't have access to the kind of support that they need. And so it's time, I think, to really rethink the system to better focus the resources and to make sure that those students have a broader variety of ways to pay for college. And yes, loans can be a part of the answer, but we need more grants, we need more scholarships. The good news is that this is starting to happen already. The federal government is looking hard at Pell Grants. There's broad bipartisan support to enhance that program. Universities are looking hard at both the level of financial support they give and how they award it. And the private sector is getting involved too. I can tell you at Sallie Mae, we've contributed $3 million over 3 years in partnership with the Thurgood Marshall College Fund to actually provide scholarships to this very type of at-risk population.
Awesome, John. Yes, I agree. The system definitely needs to be shaken up a bit. And I'm happy to know that there is so much movement happening in both the public and the private sector. Finally, tell us, what's the role of private student lenders like Sallie Mae in helping students and families make informed choices about college?
Mia, as a private student lender, our primary business is gap financing. So think of that as, we're the last dollars to help a family or a student, bridge, the cost of attendance, versus the other sources of aid or support that they have, be it scholarships or grants or savings or family support. But while that's our business, it's not our mission. Our mission is to power confidence as students begin their unique journey through higher education. And we do that, to, through, and immediately after a student's journey through college. So that takes the form of things like tuition calculators that help families and students understand the full cost of attendance, scholarship tools that help them find scholarships that they may not know they were eligible for. For example, we helped just last year 24,000 students find $67 million of scholarships that they don't have to pay back. It goes through the time that they're in college. We provide tutoring support for students who might be struggling academically. And we provide grants focused on completion because we know sometimes unplanned financial issues derail the dream of higher education. And finally, we follow our students after they graduate and we help them find internships and with career planning so that they can get the real value out of their education. And we do that not just because it's our business, but it's our mission, it's what we believe in, and it's who we are as Sally Mae.
Wow, I'm so grateful for Sally Mae and everything you all are doing to invest in the community and just support. So thank you so much for joining Axios, John.
Thank you, Mia. Appreciate being with you.
Next, over to Russ Contreras.
I'm Russell Contreras, the race and justice reporter here at Axios. Our final guest is the Executive Director of Education Trust West, Christopher J. Nellum, who is joining us from Oakland, California. Dr. Nellum, thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
Thanks, Ross. I'm happy to be here. I'm doing well.
Before we get into some of the issues we're facing today, take me back to where you grew up in Brawley, California. This is the Inland Empire, where today many families, about a third, are struggling with poverty or underemployment. Based on what was the system telling you that you were destined for, and how did you see access to college when you were young?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. I'm from Brawley, California. We're in the Imperial Valley. It's one of California's highest poverty places in the state. And for me, the messages I got about going to college were in some ways few and far between. I was a first generation college student. I grew up in poverty. Visiting food banks was not unfamiliar to me growing up. And the messages we got about what happens after high school were potentially going to our local community college or working at a prison or in factories or mining. And those are all really honorable jobs, but we were not getting really strong messages about going to college until one day a counselor pulled me aside and said, "Hey, you should really think about financial aid and applying to go to college." And that single conversation changed my life.
And Dr. Nellum, can you tell us what happened after that? You say you changed your life, but when you entered the institution of higher education, it's like, did you get the support you needed?
So I've been very fortunate to have mostly women of color support me. I think it was really hard. I went to a large college here in California. I was one of very few Black students at the college. I was receiving a Pell Grant, um, and navigating the college really became up to me and a small group of friends who were trying to help me navigate as well. And so I had access to college, but getting there is just, as I think most folks know, getting there is just half the battle. Trying to figure out how to navigate the situation and be successful was really difficult, and I didn't really even know where to go to ask questions.
Today in California, we have a new law that requires high school students to fill out the FAFSA. This is, of course, the free form for applying for financial aid. How important is this step in getting especially low income students of color access to college and see what their opportunities are?
Mm. So I think one of the things, Russ, that comes to mind is we hear often as an organization here in California, we're very connected to community-based organizations, mostly organizations working with young kids of color. And just imagine being a young person, having done pretty much everything we've asked you to do. You've completed the college courses, you showed up, maybe you even applied to college, and then you still have this other thing, this form to complete that will help you understand the really important last piece. Can I afford to do this? And so we argue at the Education Trust West, we have a large coalition of civil rights, education, equity organizations that joined us in this argument, saying and said, as public high schools, we can't say we are preparing young people to go to college and not help them understand the cost. So I would argue it is vitally important We need people to understand different financial aid packages. We need people to understand that they actually can afford to go. That's really the piece that was important to us, that there is money, free money in often cases for folks to go to college. So we think it's a tremendously important step. And the state agreed with us. And now we have this new law that will go into effect next year.
You've also mentioned one of the things that we need for college accessibility are partnerships, partnerships outside of institutions of higher education. What do you mean by that?
So, similar to schools, public high schools, for example, colleges are embedded in communities. We have, especially in communities of color, there are a number of community-based organizations that play an important part of helping young people stay engaged in college. We think a lot about the summer melt we hear a lot about between, when a young person leaves high school, and it's the time in between over the summer. And community-based organizations are vital in helping people stay connected, helping them feel motivated. And so we should definitely not see supporting young kids of color in particular as just something that's up to colleges. We have groups in our ecosystem down in the Inland Empire, for example, that champion policy change, that we're getting young people meals during the pandemic and laptops. And so, as you can see, those partnerships, I think, extend beyond the campus, which we think is phenomenal.
At the same time, we've had this movement, especially among tech bros, who've been saying, look, guys, you don't need a college education. All you need is some stock and some good meme stocks to succeed in this world. How detrimental is that belief? Especially these people are coming from a point of privilege, telling low income students of color they don't need access to education. Is that detrimental to the attainment of education, but also the attainment of wealth and progress?
Absolutely. Look, I struggle with folks who sort of push that narrative, because if you ask them, did they go to college or did their parents encourage them to go to college? The answer is usually yes. Tech, tech bros, they're great. I have some as my friends. A lot of them went to college, and sure, you can be successful without going to college. That can happen. But the surest way to lift, especially people of color, out of poverty is a college education. We saw this through the pandemic. We've seen this as the jobs have recovered from the pandemic. Folks who have a college degree did better. They had a shield or a protective, um, you know, film around them, which was college education. So I think it is tremendously damaging. And the thing that we say often is, I want everyone to truly have the option to go to college. And if you choose not to go, that's very different than a system sort of forcing you out or not supporting you to get there. And so we want everyone to have a real shot at going. And if they want to go, they should have it paid for, meet uh, supportive faculty, and graduate.
And currently, right now, the Biden administration is considering a proposal to cancel student debt, either partially or
Mm.
fully. This we know many people who took out loans did not complete college education. Is the possibility of canceling student debt, would that help people continue their education, or would that be some sort of detriment to the economy? Can you explain that for us?
So yes, Russ, this conversation about student loans and student debt is lively, in particular right now. I think it comes down to what you believe. Do you believe that schools have to go into debt to receive an education? For me, that answer is a clear no. And so I think debt forgiveness, in particular, as you mentioned, for folks who go to college and maybe don't finish, would be a huge boon. Maybe they would say, okay, I'm freed of this debt and I can go back. But whether or not it's targeted in that way, potential loan forgiveness, we need to do away with student debt and then also figure out a way to control college costs on the other side of the equation. So I think um, it would be a huge policy win for the administration, and I think it would hugely help students of color. In particular, we know Black women carry more debt and then experience a wealth gap. And so I think it would be tremendous if that would happen.
A few years ago, I was in Mississippi in the Delta area, and I toured some areas that were struggling with poverty. One thing I noticed is that a lot of women there did have college education or did some sort of have a higher education background, but yet they continue to struggle with either underemployment or poverty. What can we do to facilitate people like that to really exceed in this economy and exceed going on to even graduate school?
I think one thing is to, if assuming they likely have student debt, is we should deal with that debt, and that would free them from that baggage. I think the other things we have to do, Russ, I think this country is struggling with. We need to have a really honest conversation about racism and structural racism. We know that women of color, Latina women, Black women in particular, who have a college degree sometimes make less than white women who only have a high school degree. And so I think we have to have a real conversation about race, racism, hiring practices, and then on the other end, deal with student debt.
Dr. Nellum, it was a pleasure. Thank you for joining us, and we appreciate the conversation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for another vital conversation that has made everyone smarter, faster. For more on the future of education, sign up for our Axios newsletters at axios.com/newsletters or go to our Axios app. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you on axios.com.